It's good to be with you, albeit virtually. I'm Janine Benyus, and I am coming to you from western Montana, where it is a blustery end of winter day, lots more lion than lamb, but beautiful bluebird sky. It's good to be with you. Today I'd like to talk about how biomimicry can be a part of our new planetary narrative. And as Joanna Macy says, part of moving from the great unraveling to the great turning. So biomimicry is a practice of learning from and then emulating life's wisdom, life's designs and processes and strategies. It's how to be a good earthling, essentially. And part of being a good earthling is being a welcome species. And what I mean by that is a species that gives back, that is beneficent in its place, that it makes the place better because it's there. Like these hummingbirds that my partner and I, we went to Ecuador this December and went on a birding trip. And everywhere we saw hummingbirds, it was a celebration. We would pile out of the van. And very often it was in people's backyards because they would plant flowers and to welcome the hummingbirds in. And the hummingbirds would come in and sip the nectar, and in the process, of course, pollinate those flowers. That reciprocity is what being a welcome species is all about. Here's another example, this snow goose, beautiful, beautiful bird. They travel in large flocks. This is the spring migration that I'll be going to in April. Along the Rocky Mountain front, there's this little lake called Freeze Out. And 3/4 of the Pacific flyway of tundra swans and snow geese come by. It's just these swirling white clouds. It's incredible. And so we go with friends, we make a weekend of it. And you just have to be careful when they're coming over that you wear some sort of hood or hat. But they come up from the ponds each day and they go out to the farmers' fields. And out in the farmers' fields, they leave a gift. They eat the spent grain that the farmers purposely leave there for them, and then they fertilize those fields and with nitrogen. And those farmers, I guarantee you, do not have to buy fertilizer, open a bag of fertilizer. So I wonder about us. If geese can be a gift to the Rocky Mountain front, and these zebras with their fertilization can refresh the Okavanda Delta by chewing on the grass grows faster and higher. And these buffalo herds can make the prairie bloom just by the fact that they scarify some of the soil, which allows some of these forbs and herbs and legumes, nitrogen-fixing plants to get started. And if packs of wolves can heal Yellowstone, when they were gone, Yellowstone missed them. And when they came back, there's a beautiful story about these trophic cascades that they were able to bring back when they were patrolling the elk, and the elk weren't hanging out around and eating all the willows around the streams. The elk were more cautious. The willows came back. The streams began to return to their cold and sinewy ways, and beavers came back. So they actually helped. They were welcome. They helped Yellowstone heal. Beavers do the same thing. When they make their ponds, it looks like they're changing one habitat to another, and they are, forest to a pond. But they leave after a while and they go down or up the watershed. And if you look at a watershed that has beavers, what you see is this beautiful mosaic of habitat, patches of habitat, and much more biodiversity, than in a place without them. So they're a welcome species. So the question is, what about us? What about us? When we have moved of our long sweep of history into places, do we make them better? And how can we? How shall we live here as a welcome species? So let's look first at what kind of species we are. These are They've become good friends. And Seth and Billy and Anuj, these are folks from our biomimicry professional 2-year master's course. We take folks out. We have online, and then we do 6 one-week courses around the world where they get to explore places like Glacier. And these crazy guys swam out there. Look at them. The kind of species we are is a life-loving species. That's what we are. We're a life-loving species. And we have an affinity for the rest of the natural world. And we have many, many, many different relationships with that world. And biomimicry's for a new one for Western industrial culture, one of seeing nature as teacher. What kind of species are we? Let's just remember how young we are. Homo sapiens sapiens have been here 200 to 250,000 years. And life's been on Earth for 3.8 billion with a B. So we're young. We're a toddler. And the way to become a welcome species on this planet is to first quiet our cleverness and then listen, echo what we hear from the rest of the natural world, because we are nature. We're just very young. And of course, give thanks. Those are the 4 steps I think of in biomimicry. What we give thanks to is life on Earth is responsible. Our planetary elders are responsible for every breath we take and every sip of water that we can drink. Because 4.5 billion years ago, this Earth was very inhospitable. And life made of this place an Eden, cleaning the water, sweetening the air. This is Dr. Adam Neiman's graph about, I think our role is inside of those bubbles. The one on the left is all the water, sea, ice, fresh water, compared to the volume of the Earth. And the one on the right is all the air. These have been sweetened for us, and that's our job to continue to create conditions conducive to life. So how do we do that? Luckily, a sustainable world already exists. We do not have to make this up at all. Biomimicry is the conscious emulation, and I mean conscious. And emulation has respect in it. You emulate species you admire. 3.8 billion years of wisdom, which is the embodied wisdom of living well in place. It's learning from the locals. There's no body of work that is better than the book of the local and how these organisms adapt. A plant or an animal is an answer to the question the land is asking. This is a moose that came in Montana after we had done a lot of work rehabilitating our place. And that visitation was sort of like an endorsement. We'd made him welcome. Biomimicry is not bioutilization. It's not using wood for your floors. That's bioutilization. We do that all the time. When we harvest it sustainably, it's fine. But it's not biomimicry. And it's also not bioassisted. In other words, it's not using algae to make energy or yeast to make beer. Those are bioassisted technologies, which we will continue to do. Biomimicry is something different. It's valuing nature not for what we can extract, wood, or harvest, or domesticate a cow, but for what we can learn. So it's a new relationship to the rest of the natural world. The organism stays in the wild while we borrow its blueprints and we consult for its advice. It's a very different idea. It also, I think, is incredibly powerful because it teaches us how to view and value nature in a whole new light. For too long, we've been seeing a tree as, oh, the ash outside my window ash is good for making baseball bats. That's not the kind of value that this is. This is seeing another organism with great deal of respect and seeing what it is that they are our engineering and chemistry and physics peers, if not they are our elders. I mean, I think they are our mentors. So it's a way of seeing. It's a lens. So for instance, what do you see here? Some people might see dinner. This is John DeBerry. And what he saw that these organisms, by moving close together, fish moving close together, surf off each other's vortices. They actually create vortices, spirals in the water ahead, and the other fish will curl like a hydrodynamic sail to catch that vortex and be moved a little forward. Trout do that to swim upstream together. It's really quite beautiful. And he knew about this. He was an engineer, and he was working on wind turbines. So he decided to, instead of doing horizontal wind turbines, which take up a lot of space, he was working with these vertical wind turbines. And he found that if he put them close together, like in a school of turbines, that the wind would hit the first ones, they would begin to spin, they would create vortices, and the ones behind them would start spinning even before the wind hit them. And he was able to increase over horizontal wind turbine 5 times the power generation. That's incredible. But he looked in water, he looked in fish, he looked at that kind of fluid. Or what do you see here? You might see a tropical beach and a great place to have a vacation. But I see a coral reef that has been built with carbon dioxide. Let me explain. This is Brent Constance. And that's what he sees. And he asked himself, how do corals sequester a ton of carbon dioxide for every ton of reef that they build? And because what they do is they take dissolved CO2 and they combine it with calcium and carbonate ions in the water, and they create that very cement-like material. So Brent decided to do the same thing that the corals do. Using their recipe, what he did was he took CO2 out of smokestacks, actually, and then for the seawater, he used a waste product, which is the brine, very heavily salty material that comes out of a desalination plant. And it has all these minerals. So he put those two together with the coral reef's recipe and out precipitates the raw materials for concrete and aggregate, road aggregate, drywall. In other words, things that we used to go to get calcium carbonate from mines and bring it and make those things, he's now making out of a waste product of brine and a waste product of CO2 using the coral's recipe. It's pretty awesome. And in fact, if you want to see that, you can go to the Harvey Milk terminal, the new terminal at the San Francisco airport, and the road aggregate and material to make that airport came from Blue Planet. So it's starting to happen. And what we asked ourselves was, how can we nurture this? How can we nurture more John DeBerrys and Brent Constance? How can we make a whole new generation of nature's apprentices? And so we have a nonprofit, the Biomimicry Institute, and we decided to give people tools like Ask Nature, which I'll tell you about later. But we also give people an opportunity to practice biomimicry. And I want to show you some of the results. We do a youth design challenge that starts in middle school to high school. We do a launch pad, which is very early stage companies. We help them, biomimetic companies. And then we have the Ray of Hope Prize with the Ray C. Anderson Foundation. We award $100,000. And we put these teams through, basically create a cohort of learning teams and help. We're trying to help this lens and this way of innovating become second nature, so to speak. So let me show you some of the things that are coming out of it. We ask people to solve big challenges. If you're going to mimic nature in all of her wisdom, might as well put it towards good. So one of the things we're looking at is climate, and food waste is a huge part of the solution, reducing our food waste, because food waste is 30% of all the food that we eat is spoiled or in some other way is wasted. And if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases because of all the methane and that comes from, and also all the emissions during the creation of the food and the trucking of the food. And so to waste it is something we really can get a handle on. And this is the team at GreenPod Labs, and in the middle there in the red shirt is Deepak, who is an amazing entrepreneur. He started as a plant chemist, and he realized something about plants that made him think that food waste is preventable. And that's part of what is in his spirit that makes him such a welcome species. He said this is a preventable problem. In India, the problem is dire because whereas in the United States, most farms are 400 acres, that's the average, it's a 2-acre farm is average in India. And India is the second biggest producer in the world of fruits and vegetables. But what happens is that the small producer puts fruits and vegetables onto a train from the countryside, goes into the cities, and there's no refrigeration. It's 95 degrees normally. And they lose 40% of their crop. So that's 40% less income coming to their family. And there's also the sheer waste and the greenhouse gases. He said that's a preventable problem. He knew that because he studied plant chemistry. What plants do when they are attacked by microbes, say, which cause spoilage, they give off these chemicals. And say your tomato plant gets chewed on, it will give off jasmonic acid, which will go to another plant. The other plant picks it up and says, I have to beef up my defenses against this particular bug or this particular microbe. And fruits and vegetables also, in their early days, have that capability of switching on those defenses without ruining the taste of the fruit or vegetable. They just have to get the signal. And there's many different kinds of signals depending on what kind of fruit or vegetable you are. And so the GreenPod Lab group, they study this, and they mimic the material, and they put it into a sachet, a small little packet, and they put 5 or 6 of them in a large 20-kilogram crate. And that's enough for the tomatoes to get the signal and to start to beef up their defenses. It doesn't change the taste at all or the nutritional value. Here's the trials after 15 days. If a train gets stuck, it can be a long time, and 15 days normal without GreenPod Labs sachet and then with it. This is a huge problem. He studied in the United States. He wanted to come back to India, and it is their trials. They're now in production, and they are reducing food spoilage by 40 to 80%. So thank you, Deepak and team. Here's another one. Wind turbines. A lot of the pushback against them is that they're noisy, and so a guy named Ryan Church of Biome Renewables has studied owls and how silent a predator they are because of the trailing edge of their feathers. It's this serration that plays with wind in such a way as to really quiet the turbulence. He also studied maple samaras, which are the seeds of maple trees. And they're the things that when you were little, at least when I was a little kid, you'd throw them up in the air and they would helicopter down. Well, that's quite a feat, engineering-wise. They do that so they can get away from their parent and have sunlight, not be under that shade. But he studied this as an engineer, Ryan did. And what he did, he's created this cone in the center there. That power cone is an add-on to other wind turbines. And basically where there was a lot of loss right in the center of a wind turbine. And what this does is able to direct the wind that's coming onto the blades. He then puts retrofits on serrated owl feather inspired material that quiets it. So he's increasing the power by 10%, which is a lot now in renewables. And then he's reducing that noise. So you can imagine having a wind turbine near you that is 80% quieter is a really big deal for adoption. Toxins, my goodness, that is something that in the natural world, toxins are only used in venom, and then they even break down. But toxins are verboten in the rest of the natural world. So how do they do manufacturing without it? In our manufacturing, we do what's called heat, beat, and treat. That's what a material scientist will tell you, or a chemist will tell you. They'll say, what is the heat, beat, and treat on the process? How high what kind of temperature are we going to cook it at? What pressure, high pressure that we're going to put it under, and how are we going to treat it with hydrochloric acid or other reagents or solvents? And that's not what a spider or any other organism who makes materials can do. A spider's silk is 5 times stronger, ounce for ounce, than steel, and yet it's made with local raw materials. And these raw materials basically get digested into a fluid, and then the spider squeezes it out through one of its abdomen, and that manufacturing process that happens in what are called spinnerets is what our next team decided to look at. And what they found was that the manufacturing process of the spider can be mimicked. And it's taken decades for them to do this, but they are able to now take readily available proteins, even from waste materials, put them in a liquid, and then weave them out and make biodegradable and really strong fibers. Very, very interesting. The Spintex Engineering, they won last year. This year, we also had another chemistry group that said, if photosynthesis works, does its chemistry, does its miracle with the sun's light, then it's possible for light energy to be used for chemistry. And so they have created a whole new chemical process, a new kind of catalyst. It's a photocatalyst that's able, you just shine light without heating or high pressures to do the chemical reactions that we need. They call themselves New Iridium because iridium was a metal and a very, very rare material that was used in a lot of catalysts that industrial chemists use. This is called New Iridium. It's just light. And water, of course, the SDGs are there. Purifying water, whether you're taking salt out of water or other pollutants or contaminants, it all has to do with membranes. And we do something called reverse osmosis, where we push water against a membrane, it's full of salt, and we squeeze out the clean water. But in doing that, we actually often block the pores. So what life does is very different. This mangrove is sitting in salt water, but it subsists on fresh water. So it's desalinating, solar-powered desalination plant. And the way it does that, and the way you do that throughout every cell in your body, is these little proteins, these little pore-shaped proteins called aquaporins. And they basically escort the water molecule through, leaving everything else behind. And instead of reverse osmosis, it's called forward osmosis. It's very low energy. So that's been proven, but the aquaporins and membranes have been tender. So we needed a way to strengthen them. So our next team, Aquamidate, this company, went to another organism in the ocean, the diatom, dinoflagellates that create a shell of silica around themselves. And they mimicked that, and they were able to toughen these membranes. So watch for forward osmosis, low energy water purification coming your way. Circular economy. We have a new name for it. It's big industrial circulation, and putting companies in food webs and circulating so that there's no waste, that it gets upcycled again and again. That has been happening in the natural world for eons, literally. And so these models are really important. Now we're saying to ourselves, how does nature keep its materials in flow like that? And because, what we've now realized is that of our plastics that we think we're recycling, only 90% of those are recycled. Most are lost to the environment. Some are incinerated. Some are landfilled. So also lost to the environment. And this is actually, and a lot of our plastics are what we wear, our clothing. 63% of all clothing is synthetic. It's mostly plastic, polyester mostly. This is in a city called Accra in Ghana, where 15 million garments a week make their way down there from our Goodwills and our other places where this with fast fashion, we churn through it, winds up there. They try to resell some of it, but most of it winds up landfilled, incinerated, or like these slugs of clothes. They go out with the rains, with the monsoon, out into the ocean. So we thought, what would nature do about this? And we looked at the circular economy. This is an institute project. We looked at the circular economy and said, what are we missing? And what we're actually missing is saying to ourselves, being honest with ourselves and saying, if this leaks to the environment, as much of it will, why aren't we making things in a way that allows them to decompose and recompose the way they do in the natural world? And how do we start to focus on decomposition and recomposition, transformation, as nature would? So we did a deep dive into how does nature decompose. For Loudest Foundation is a funder of this, in addition to others. We're looking at that design for decomposition, and then we're understanding the rules of decomposition, vetting the technologies now that are used to deal with end-of-life plastics, and then we're seeing which ones are truly biomimetic and trying to pull some of these biomimetic ones out and actually pilot them. And the pilots, we're doing 2 pilots, one in Europe for well-resourced infrastructure and one in Ghana for under-resourced infrastructure. So stay tuned to that. It's called Design for Decomposition. And the kinds of things that we're finding are amazing. There's a great story about, as we ask ourselves, how does nature transform plastic? And eventually, we want to go upstream and say, let's get rid of that plastic clothing and let's go to clothing that will biodegrade naturally. So in order to do that, we have to get rid of this legacy plastic that's now floating around in our oceans and in our landfills. So it turns out, here's a great story. There's a woman named Federica who studies the waxworm caterpillar. And she took it home. She took a bunch of them home in a plastic bag, in a baggie, because biologists work at night and they have to bring their critters with them. And by the time she got home and put them on her kitchen table, they were out of the bag, crawling out of the bag, because they had ingested the plastic. And she thought, oh, well, let's see how they do. And they were quite healthy. So they had transformed it. So she knew then that there was a chemical process, just like Brent Constance knew there was a chemical process in coral. And these are the kinds of things that we're going to be vetting. Now, agriculture, there's lots of folks who have entered our projects, our design contests in agriculture. These folks haven't, but I just want to tell you about them. This is a group of people who are now looking at these kelp forests as models for how we might do 3D ocean permaculture, where farmers actually farm different parts of the ocean, not in an aquaculture way, which would create, plumes of nitrogen, but literally to put the organisms where they would normally be in an ocean free flow through area. So what's happening is Brent Smith he's got ropes where he's growing kelp, which sequesters carbon like crazy, and then in between the kelp, he's hanging cages that with the larvae of these shellfish, and he's growing scallops and oysters and clams and mussels along with the kelp. They're actually restoring the acidified oceans. They're reversing that, as well as pulling down lots and lots of carbon dioxide. Really, really interesting. And it takes us starting to create, chefs starting to create a yearning for kelp in our diets. And he's also doing that. He's working to sell all of these things together as part of a system from a restorative agriculture system. Now, what about, how do we bring nature's wisdom into everyday life? Because you may not be a designer or a fisherman, but I actually believe we're all designers. We all design things in our lives. We all come up with strategies. And where do those strategies come from? What if they could come from 3.8 billion year old proven strategies? So that's why for us, the idea of reconnect is so important. We have three seeds, three things that we care about in biomimicry and that we teach about. And one is the models that I just talked about, the emulate part. The other is this reconnect part. It's incredibly important for us to realize that we're not alone, that this is our home, but not ours alone. And in order to be able to sit there, open your notebook, and take in nature's wisdom, you have to be there. You have to reconnect. And you have to have this radical empathy that says, these organisms are doing what I'm trying to do. They're tucking their kids into bed at night too. How do they provide for themselves while enhancing the place they live, right? So that's a huge part of our work, and something you can do every day. Go out with a question on your lips, and without hunting for it, let it come to you. And you'll start to observe the natural world. Go to our biomimicry.org site, our nonprofit site, and look up something called 30 Days of Reconnect. When the pandemic happened, we gave people every day an exercise to go out and do this kind of a reconnect with biomimicry lens. And people all over the world participated, sent us their nature journaling. It was awesome. The third seed of biomimicry is this idea of ethos. And this is something you can also refer to. If you go to our biomimicry.net site, you can download this. And what this is a chart of 26 life's principles. These are things that, with all the diversity of life on Earth, these are things that most organisms have in common. So for us, that's an instruction guide. And there are things like cultivate cooperative relationships and maintain integrity through self-renewal, use low-energy processes, self-organize, build from the bottom up, do chemistry in water, use readily available materials and energy, reshuffle information, expect the unexpected. So there are technical things here, but there are also things that just have to do with social innovation, with your everyday lives. So check that out. That's something we use too when we work with engineers and designers, as we do at Biomimicry 3.8. Before we design anything, we look at this as basically a aspiration. You know, does what we want to create needs to follow these rules? And then we do it as a check-in to make sure of the rightness of whatever it is that we're inventing, so that we're not inventing something based on spider silk, but we're doing it with terrible chemistry, right? We also will dive down sometimes, really fascinating to look at things like mutualisms, which are basically partnerships in nature where both parties benefit, like this sea anemone and the clownfish. The clownfish is, releasing fertilizer for the anemone, food for the anemone, and the anemone is protecting the clownfish. So they're in a mutualism. But what we look at is how, in the natural world, we look at big patterns. How do mutualisms get established? How do they get maintained without cheating? How do they get passed on? And we take some of these rules and we work with companies and organizations and communities, especially, to try to get people to work in ways where it's reciprocal, not parasitic. It's reciprocal and it's mutualism. And there's a very particular way to approach that. And life really knows how to do that. That's what life is. We talk so much about competition, but really mutualism is the very, very important aspect of any complex adaptive system like an ecosystem. It's full of mutualisms. Another social innovation piece that we look at is called the adaptive cycle, which is that comes from ecosystems. It's C.S. Holling's work, and it's the way ecosystems change through time. And it's been picked up by people like the Resilience organization, resilience.org, and applied to social systems, and it applies very well. So what this says is, if you look, there's a seedlings, young trees starting to grow, let's say a forest, and then it goes towards maturity, and then those resources are locked up in those trees and those mycorrhizal fungal networks, and there's networks that are quite tight, and at some point there's a release. Either there's pests that come in or there's a fire, and that releases that particular structure that's been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. But it releases that to make opportunity for the next. And I think that's kind of where we are now. We're somewhere in the collapse phase. But if we think about it as release, then what happens is in that blue back loop, we call it, that back loop is where we are now, where we're going to take those nutrients that have been given to us, basically, like, they had been locked up and now they're released. Think about all the people that changed jobs during the pandemic and all that really disrupted us, that pandemic. And we came back and we said, we're going to do things differently. And those of us who are starting to create different kinds of networks, different kinds of forms for economics and for how we knit ourselves together as a society or govern ourselves, all of those happen in the back loop. And that's the renewal phase. And it's fast in the natural world. It's very fast. So this is going to happen quickly. But then it's very important because whatever we come up with is what is going to grow in the front loop. And that's going to be very slow. So it's sort of what we create now is what is the world we're going to have for a while. So that's why it's very, very important. And we are no different than these ecosystems. It's just good to know it's good to map where you are right now. The other thing that you can do in your everyday life is the way you live and where you live. I think there's enormous power of place. This is LA after the pandemic, right? When nobody was driving. Isn't that beautiful? The clear air. These folks in Los Angeles, how are they being welcome species? How are they contributing back to the ecological health and social health of that place? We don't often ask ourselves this, but place is actually where we can make the biggest difference. And I know this personally. This is a view right now from my house, well, a couple of months from now. And when my partner and I first moved here 32 years ago, it was completely overgrazed and beaten up piece of land. Really had horses on it, too many, and it was cheap, but it was, we have been regenerating it. We've been on the healing team. We have not been regenerating it. We've been helping the helpers here and bringing it back to life and to health, which I would recommend for anybody. But living as close as we do to a wilderness area, the largest wilderness in the lower 48 is right here in western Montana, the Selway Bitterroot Forest. That peak there is a holy and sacred peak of the Salish Kootenai who were here not that long ago. And this is their ancestral lands. Hundreds of miles in is all wilderness. It's thousands of square kilometers of wilderness. And when the air comes from that place, it's clean. It's cleared and purified and cooled. When water comes to us, the gift is clean water. The gift of elk herds pouring out of there. What wildlands do is they exhale goodness and they gift it away. And we are the recipients of that. And I never really thought to ask myself the question, shouldn't we return the favor? Until this day, I had an epiphany, and we have this compass statement in our company called Muddy Knees and Epiphanies, because we take people out on these journeys. And I didn't have muddy knees. I was actually in a plane. I was flying into Missoula, Montana, where I go to fly. And I was flying over this wilderness area, and I knew what it was like down there. I knew the fragrant soils and fragrant air and how cool it was and the incredible wildlife diversity and bird song. And then I got to the city, and it stopped. And I said, why is it that we're like the sacrifice zone? Our cities don't have that same function, they don't function the same way. And we don't expect them to. We basically put gray for everywhere we're going to live, and then green, and we expect the green to absorb our pollutants and to keep us healthy and to bring us recreational opportunities. But what are we giving back? If you can imagine all the arrows of goodness going in towards the gray areas, now imagine arrows of goodness going out. What would that look like? I know where to look. And where we look is the reference habitats, the ones that are doing it. Ecosystems are generous for the reasons I said. They're constantly doing these things. They're refreshing our soul, cycling nutrients, controlling pests, storing water, storing carbon, right? Supporting pollinators and all kinds of genetic diversity. They're producing food and fiber and raw materials and calming floods. That's generous. So how do we create generous design? A truly biomimetic city would be functionally indistinguishable from the wildland next door. So we started to say that to our clients who were coming to us and saying, communities were saying, we're gonna create a whole new district in the city, or we're building a new housing development, or a new university campus, or a new corporate campus. Or a city might say, what should be our goals for the next 100 years? And we said, biomimetic city would function like the wildland next door. And what it means is that it would provide a suite of ecosystem services. And those are all those services I talked about. I call them ecological gifts, ecological benefits. Imagine a development being tasked to have the same ecological performance as the wildland next door. You would ask the buildings to do their part. Maybe they're going to sequester carbon with cross-laminated timbers, or the concrete that Brett Constance makes. And there's going to be lots of lush and green ecostructure, of course, contributing services. But sidewalks, roadways, everybody's got to pull their ecological weight. And everything should create multiple benefits. And it should go downwind and downstream the way ecological benefits really do. So instead of having you move in somewhere and you have a NIMBY situation, not in my backyard, you would have a PIMBY. Imagine if you were that welcome as a neighbor. So how do we become providers of these ecological benefits? So we started, my managing director, Nicole Miller, started this amazing learning cohort of these companies, big companies. We've done 4 or 5 projects now for Ford. We have 20 projects all going. Microsoft data centers, 20 to 30 data centers being built every year. We might as well make them ecologically beneficial. App State University campus. Really, really interesting. So we're starting to do this. And let me just take you through the process of how we do it. I mean, basically what we're saying is we're going to measure a reference habitat, something close by, not 200 years ago, but something close by that's relatively intact. And we're going to see what kind of ecological benefits it has. And then we're going to go to the building itself, or the building site, and see what ecological benefits are happening there. And then we'll have a difference, the ecological performance and the current performance. And what's really nice is that we have an iPad-enabled app. We have a partner that we work with, ESG, and they've created this iPad-enabled app that's really very cool, that allows us to go out and in a couple of days get the measurements that we need. We measure what habitat would be there if the building wasn't there, and we look at what the ecological benefits are, and we measure them. And that becomes the new aspirational metrics for the building project. We literally say, tons per acre of nitrogen and phosphorus, gallons per storm for water collection and storage. This is what you have to meet acre for acre. And we also go back to the building site. We look at what's happening there. Not much. That's usually a pretty low bar. And that's the baseline. And then we say, okay, here's the current performance. Here's our goal. Here's our aspirational goal. And now let's design into the gap. Then we go back to these reference habitats and we look at how the organisms there are solving their challenges, right? And for instance, that becomes the biomimetic model for these design interventions. So for instance, we did a Genius of Biome in the temperate forest of the East Coast, and the beaver was one of our champions, because what beavers do is they basically, as I was saying, they create all this biodiversity, but they also purify water by making these ponds that are sort of cascading down a watershed. They store, sink, and purify water. So we said, what if a building could do that? And this is the U.S. Coast Guard building. And we worked with landscape architects at HOK on this. And instead of building a giant 2 towers or whatever, they had water coming in from above. They're on a sloped site, and they wanted to have this lake down below. We said, well, why don't we have the building do the water purification? So this is what it looks like from above. And it's a terraced set of green roofs, and the green roofs have different plants in them, as a beaver's progression of ponds would have different plants going down. And by the time it gets down, it's cleaner than when it came in. It's a gift. So what if all buildings functioned like wetlands? What if they were the concrete was made of CO2 sequestering? This is in Singapore, a hotel in Singapore. What if every bit of sidewalk and roadway was permeable so that water would be stored? And what if parklands sponged up stormwater? What if they were allowed to flood during floods and then they sponged it up and held it? This is John Todd's ecological machine. What if Lobby Greenery cleaned and recycled the water that was coming down from your taps, right? Imagine if we helped organisms in climate change. Now there's so much on the move from south to north, and from lowlands to uplands. They're seeking cool, and they're going to need some help with migration. So what if every roadway had to have migration corridors like this, creating the ecosystem function of habitat support? These are living breakwaters at Staten Island, a great landscape architecture firm called Scape. They're creating basically a new oyster beds that used to be there. They're creating habitat that will attract and allow these larval oysters to get going there. And then that actually acts as a breakwater as well as a source of food for local folks. It's called habitexture. And sometimes it happens by accident. This is Austin, the famous bridge where the bridge stanchions were such that the dividers in the bridge were such that bats really loved that particular shape. And so they began to roost there. And now it's become this thing. Every evening, the roosting bats come out by the hundreds of thousands, and people watch, and they have music festivals, and they love it. What if habitexture and creating homes and roosts for organisms was something we did by design? It's also a very big social justice part of this, because asthma rates skyrocket. And this is just one tiny little moss-filled kiosk. But it actually is purifying the air. What if all of those walls had that air purification? What would asthma rates do in the city? Here's the Bank of America building that Bob Fox, the architect, spec'd a HVAC system that cleans the air that comes into it from New York City, it leaves 3 times cleaner. What if every building had that? And if the top of buildings, if they weren't purifying water, what if they were farms? Right? What if they were supporting pollinators by design? And what if they were lifting the human spirit? This is the High Line Trail. It used to be an old railroad that had gone feral. And now it is just a treasure. If you're in New York City, go walk the High Line. It's just absolutely wonderful. So these are, when we make a lush and livable place for other organisms, it also becomes an amazing place for us, of course, right? And this idea of creating design for ecosystem services, it's a whole new category. So what you're doing is creating a whole new set of jobs too, to design and implement and then maintain and monitor these amazing, trees on rooftops and balconies. That's a whole new job category, and a whole new, not just green jobs, but green wealth. Who's going to farm this food, or who's going to grow these nurseries for these kinds of plantings. There's plenty of work for local enterprise, and that should be part of the design specs. It is for us when we're working. What we do is we put all of these ideas together in one place because the synergies are incredible. And I've never seen designers more excited than when they're trying to do positive benefit for people and for the neighborhoods around their site. They've never been asked to do that. Now, if you can imagine what it would be like for, this is Vancouver. Imagine the ecoregion is thankful because we're there. Imagine that. Imagine it being better off because we're there. And that's something I try to imagine now, and seeing how it actually gets started. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. And at every single part of what we do, we go to the natural world of that place. If we're to become a welcome species, it is time to ask nature. I've been mentioning some of these things. I want to tell you a little bit about what you can do after this and how you can start this journey or where this lends. Biomimicry 3.8, that's the consultancy. The center at Biomimicry is where our university classes are. The Institute is where we democratize this and give you the chance to practice it. And Ask Nature is the tool that I told you about. But first, let me just say, join a workshop. Join an immersion workshop. This is the staff, actually, for Biomimicry 3.8, and that was our staff retreat. But we have these amazing workshops. You can start there. You can start with a 1-hour course online if you want. And then this is the Biomimicry Center at Arizona State University. Dana's on the right there, and Sarah, the co-directors, Sarah El-Sayed is on the left. Dana's my business partner at Biomimicry 3.8 25 years ago. We started that. And now the center at Arizona State, we teach graduate level classes, undergrad level. You can get a Master's of Science. You can get an 18-month online course or go outside like these guys, certified B-Pros are. This is in their Canadian Rockies trip. And all those folks now are doing something in their own careers, whether they're architects or chemists or engineers or physicists or we have a Disney Imagineer there, Billy Almond on the lower right side. Whatever they're doing, they're taking biomimicry to their careers. So join us there for sure. And then the Institute is the nonprofit that we started in 2006. And there we're doing the Youth Challenge, Design Challenge, the Launchpad, and Ray Hope that I told you about. But we're also doing Ask Nature. And this is something you can go and do right now when you get home. First of all, go outside. But when you come in at night, Or when you're stuck inside, check out asknature.org. You type in a design and engineering function or a question. You can type in any kind of question, up will come biological solutions. It's really cool. How does nature manage temperature? How does it move silently through air? How does it assemble ceramics at low temperatures? But it's also questions in social innovation. What are the best practices around collaboration or communication or to form enduring partnerships like the mutualisms that I spoke of? So check those things out. And when I say ask nature, there's always this conundrum because, as we know, there is no us and them. We are nature. We are nature. That's why biomimicry really does work, because there is no boundary between us and the rest of the natural world. They're also tucking their kids in at night, right? And what unites us all is this desire to fit in here. And the species that are with us on this planet, it's only less than 1% of all the species that have been on Earth. The rest are extinct. The ones that are with us, they know a lot. And what they know is fitting in here is what all life needs to do. Being welcome. But remember, as we said, we're a toddler, sometimes a toddler with matches, very young species. But we live on a competent planet. And keep this in your heart. We live on a competent planet. We're not the first to ask these questions. We have competent elders willing to gift us with their best ideas. We all have one singular shared purpose, and that is the continuity of life. The reason that you look into the rest of the natural world and it seems so incredibly competent and systemically holistic, constantly enhancing over and over each generation, is because of this thing called natural selection. And what it does is actually select. And it selects on one consistent measure of success. And that's one of the biggest things we have to redesign, is our measure of success. When that bird makes that nest, the only measure of whether that nest is one that it should make again next year is how do the chicks fare there? Is it good for life? And everything we make or design or do, any strategy we do, that's the question. Is it good for life? Capital L. Life creates conditions conducive to life. This rock and sea ball 4.5 billion years ago was sweetened by life, like us. There's no reason we can't do this at all. This is our true home. I don't believe we're aliens here at all. And I believe our true nature is generous. I'll leave you with this. That's what I look out to each day. And what I know, what this place has taught me, is that whatever part of the earth you touch, you can heal. Thank you so much for having me.